Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of UTS Confessions. Every week on the busiest street corner in Sydney, here at UTS Startups, we interview somebody from our community to hear all about their story and what's enabled their entrepreneurial success. This week, I'm really excited to be interviewing Zoltan Csaki from Citizen Wolf.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zoltan, for coming and chatting with us. Really excited for this interview. To just kick things off, in about 30 seconds, can you tell us what is Citizen Wolf?
Sure. So we're on a mission at Citizen Wolf to unfuck the fashion industry. It's incredibly destructive, and I'll go into that. And we do that by creating the technology that makes mass production obsolete. Because the biggest problem in fashion is overproduction. The default business model looks like this. I'm so arrogant that I think I know what you might want to buy in 6 months' time. And most of the time, I'm wrong. And it's crazy, because all of these things get produced, but then 1 out of 3 pieces of clothing made every year goes to landfill unsold. And the industry's worked fine for years. This business model has been okay, in theory, and that waste is just built into the model. But on a planet of finite resources, with climate change breathing down all of our necks, it's just simply unconscionable to keep running this model. And so Citizen Wolf exists to basically invert that, turn it on its head, and instead of pretending to know what you might want to buy in the future, we just ask you what you want today, and then we go and make it. Working this way means we have zero waste, zero landfill, and ultimately you get exactly what you want. There's no compromise. You get to choose the color, the fabric, the style, and then we custom make it to fit your body right here in Sydney.
Amazing.
That was too long,
No,
sorry.
that was great. 1 in 3 fabrics going to landfill is quite an alarming statistic, so really excited to chat to you all about that. But before we begin, I'd love to hear more about who you were before Citizen Wolf.
Sure. So I graduated UTS back in 2002. I was at the design school over there. I did visual communications, actually sandwiched with international studies. Had a ball, really loved my time here. Loved the course and the teachers and the whole bit. I finished and basically went into the advertising industry. I had a relatively successful career all around the world, Barcelona, London, Amsterdam, Sydney as well. And then when I was about 30, just before I turned 30 actually, I had an idea to make some software that would have made my life as an art director easier. Well, I thought so anyway. And I was arrogant enough, funnily enough, to think that I could go and make it, having never made software before. Right? How hard could it possibly be? So I went to my boss in the ad agency, and I basically said, look, I've got this idea, this is what it's going to be. Can I have a couple of developers? We'll sit in the corner, we'll go 50-50. And he was like, mate, the guy that owns this company is richer than you're ever going to be, and he will be able to afford better lawyers than you ever can. So if you actually believe this thing's going to work, I suggest you quit. Congratulations. Okay. So
Made the decision for you.
Yeah. So I quit, much to everybody, my parents and everybody around me, much to their dismay. And then spent about 2 years trying to, build this software. And I made all the classic mistakes, over-engineering the prototype and choosing the wrong technology, and we made all the mistakes basically. Had some wins along the way, but ultimately, very painfully, I shut that business down, and I was broke. I'd gone from being relatively successful in advertising to having no money at 31 or whatever. And at that point, I should have probably gone back to advertising. That's the short story. But I fell into a fashion brand, I suppose, with my best friend at the time. And we decided that we were going to start doing graphic t-shirts and then build it into a brand. And so over the next few years, that's what we did. It was a traditional fashion brand. We had stock all around the world at the end. we were selling online mostly, wholesale accounts, the whole bit. And then, but I just couldn't scale that business. And so very painfully shut that one down and was broke again. And that was in about 2015. And that's pretty much when Citizen Wolf began. So in many ways, Citizen Wolf is the phoenix from the ashes of those two prior failures. The digital, like the digital product or the software product on the one hand and fashion on the other. And I knew enough to be dangerous. I didn't know much, but I knew enough to be dangerous in sort of both of those fields. And so when my current co-founder in Citizen Wolf, Eric, we actually worked together at the ad agency here in Sydney, my very first job ever in 2003. So like fast forward 12 years and we end up going into business together, which was pretty weird, but really cool. And so, he basically said, look, he'd been living in Hong Kong for a long time, again, was in the ad industry. He's short, Vietnamese, and he basically got back here and he said, I don't understand why it's so hard to buy clothes in Australia that actually fit me. If I buy something, I got to get it altered. If I want to go to a tailor, they only want to make me a fancy suit. I don't want fancy suits anymore. I don't need them. It's just, the whole thing like just bugs me. And so, that convo was the genesis of what became Citizen Wolf.
Amazing. And so you have that aspect of your business, which is custom fit for each customer, but there's also another aspect of the circular economy. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the value prop of Citizen Wolf is tailoring, right? And the insight I guess we had was, it seemed crazy that the clothes we wear most of the time fit us the least in many ways. Or the inverse statement is possibly more true, which is like, the only time people normally wear clothes that are made to fit their body is like when they're getting married. And as a bloke, okay, you can wear the suit a couple of times, but women really don't get a chance to wear the dress that much.
It's very expensive as well, so.
Yeah, and so we were like, this is just madness, because like for 99.9% of your life, you end up rolling through life wearing clothes that in some way don't fit you. Maybe it's the shoulder, maybe whatever it happens to be, right? They're just imperfect in some way. And so we just were like, well, what if we could apply technology to basically the casual wardrobe, so we could deliver all the benefits of tailoring to the clothes we wear every day. Now, I'm not from a fashion background, despite having sort of like started this fashion brand previously, but we didn't make anything. We had an agent and we were like, dude, we want to make X. And he was like, great, go and talk to this factory and they get it sorted. Like we knew nothing. I didn't know anything about textiles or sewing or anything. Now at Citizen Wolf, we have our own factory. It's here in Marrickville. We have seamstresses. They work for us full time or all the time. And it's kind of weird in that sense. But sorry, back to your question about the circularity stuff. So the reason that I explained to you the motivation or the insight, I suppose, behind why we went for tailoring as a value prop. What we've discovered over time is that people end up having a different relationship with the clothes that are made for them than they do with something that you just buy off the rack. And so the way we kind of talk about it now, it's like selfless outcomes from selfish motivation. So inherently, when you go and buy clothes, you don't need them. It's a pretty selfish act, right? Even more so when you're bothered to get them custom fit to your body. But by working the way we do and by buying your clothes from Citizen Wolf, we actually, the model that we have created is environmentally net positive, which is distinct from the rest of the industry. So, ergo, the selfless environmental outcomes being generated by an inherently selfish motivation at the start. It was really important to us when we began that we didn't add to the problem. Fashion, as I was saying, it's an extremely destructive industry. And it's a huge industry. It's all over, like every single country, everybody wears clothes, right? So there's a lot of clothes. And so we knew the world didn't need like another fashion brand, quite simply, right? What it needed was a new model and a new way of making clothes that attempted, at least, to sort of address the problems that are at the core of the industry, namely overproduction. On top of that, we ended up becoming, so part of that journey led us to becoming B Corp, which we're really proud of. It's quite difficult. I don't know if you guys know about B Corp, but I describe it like having Mother Earth and Mother Teresa on our board in some ways. So like that was cool, but then we wanted to go a step further, and this is to your point about circularity. We decided that if we were going to put things into the world, like physical things into the world, we morally must be responsible for those things all the way through the life cycle. It's not good enough to just throw them into the world and then wash your hands and be done. We don't think so. And so what we did, we implemented a take-back scheme which actually turns your old clothes into new yarn and fabric from which we can make more clothes. And so it is completely circular. It's quite unusual. We can do it because we decided very early on to only use natural fibre. We were talking before about COVID, and that basically meant we couldn't go into certain categories like athleisure and leggings. And so, look, COVID was net beneficial for us, but we missed a lot of the boom because we literally couldn't be in the categories that people wanted to buy. However, on the flip side, we're able to be 100% circular. So, swings and roundabouts.
Amazing. And you also mentioned that you have you manufacture here in Sydney, in Marrickville. Sydney is a very expensive city. How did you kind of get that going?
Yeah, Sydney is an expensive place. So when we began, we figured that it was going to take a while, much longer than just like walking into a shop and buying something, right? For us to be able to deliver custom fit clothing. Now we could have gone, there's plenty of factories around the world that will work this way, but the lead times are pretty large, you know, like it's often 6-8 weeks turnaround. And we started with t-shirts, right? Custom fit t-shirts, and we just didn't think that anybody was going to wait that long, frankly. It's different if you're going to buy a suit and it's for your wedding or whatever, you know, like I think that's kind of different. There's a long lead time and lots of planning and stuff, but for the casual wardrobe, we just didn't think that existed. So very early on, we were basically on day one, we were like, we have to make it work here. We have to make it made in, not necessarily Sydney, but made in Australia. We're based in Sydney, it makes sense to be here, right? So when we started, we were not sewing our own clothes. We were just cutting them, putting them in a box, sending them down the road to these ladies in Waterloo. And it took 4 weeks to deliver a custom fit t-shirt. Now in tailoring, that's pretty quick still, like it's probably 2x faster than most timelines, or at least 1.5x faster. So, like tick, that's good, but it was still like incredibly slow. And so the motivation for starting the factory was actually twofold. One was like we knew we could reduce those lead times significantly if we in-sourced it, in-housed it. And two, we were paying a premium to make things right in the middle of Sydney, but we weren't able to, and we could like claim it, but we weren't able to like credibly back it up in marketing and stuff, right? There's something called Ethical Clothing Australia, which we are certified and have been for many years now. And we love those guys. But the women that we were working with originally just didn't want to do it. Because the ECA is the union, they didn't want the unions involved. I get it. And so that was sort of the motivation for setting up the factory here. But I'll tell you something for free, and that's like if I knew what that meant when I did it, I probably wouldn't do it again.
Oh, really?
You know? It's just a fundamentally different business, right? Like if you think of a Venn of 3 circles. You got a traditional fashion brand, or a fashion brand. you got a garment factory, and then the technology that allows us to work in the way that we do. I haven't even talked about that, but like Citizen Wool sits right there in the middle. And so in many ways, they're three separate, entirely separate businesses. And we're trying to do it all in the one place with not enough staff, frankly, and very hyper-limited resources. So it's, I describe the factory as the best and worst thing that ever happened to Citizen Wool. But anyway, look, we make it all here. If you're ever in Marrickville, please come and have a look. See how the sausage is made, as they say. And we'd be happy to give you a tour.
Oh, amazing. Everyone's here's got an invite, so that's incredible. So you've got quite an interesting business model, and you have all of these different, this Venn diagram of things. I want to know more about how you've gone with, raising funds to be able to continue to grow.
Yeah. So, I think every startup has two fundamental problems: awareness and money, right? And they're both difficult to solve. Money solves awareness to a degree, so you could argue that money is the number one problem in most startups. We tried to raise institutional money back in 2021, and we failed. We went around, we spoke to every single impact investor under the sun. We're like, listen, we got a new model, it's different to fashion. And then they look, oh, but you own the factory, and 3/4 of your workforce are in the factory, sewing things. It's just we didn't fit any box. Plus they were like, fuck fashion. It's so hard. It's such a hard game, right? So basically everybody we spoke to was like, no. Well, what we ended up doing was going to the crowd, effectively. We'd been in business a few years by then. We'd built up a relatively loyal, a very loyal community of customers who love what we do. And so we went on a platform called Virtual, and we went out to the crowd and we raised $1 million, and that was awesome. It was really good. Shitload of work, happy to talk more about it. But we got there, and that was cool. We subsequently went back to Virtual this year, and we raised a bit more money. But that's a well that you can't sort of tap again and again and again, right? And we're in a cost of living crisis. People don't have money today like they had sloshing around in early 2022. So funding is always fundamentally challenging. I will say, we were talking earlier about serendipity. So funny story, basically our lead angel investor before the virtual round came basically because I got asked to give a presentation at a waste management conference down in Melbourne. Now, that, as it sounds, that's the people who recycle your bottles and that kind of stuff, and take the rubbish. I don't know how they found me, I don't know why they asked me to go down there, but I didn't have any right to be at this conference. But I got asked, I said yes. I ended up going on after Ross Garnaut, who's one of the leading economists in Australia. He's pretty old and very well renowned. So I was nervous as all hell. Anyway, got up, gave this presentation. We were pretty early days at this stage. And this guy came up to me afterwards and said, hey, that was really interesting. You're based in Sydney, I'm based in Sydney, maybe we should get a coffee. And lo and behold, he's ended up investing 3 separate times in our business. And I tell that story only to say, you just never know. If somebody asks you to do something, say yes. Because the downside is you lose some time. The upside is, almost exponential. And so, yeah, I'm a big believer in serendipity. The trouble, as we were discussing earlier with Murray, is that you can't engineer it, right? And it's deeply unfair as a result, because it's just where you are at a particular time and where you're not, and all the convos and all the people you didn't meet that might have fundamentally, changed things. So it's difficult, but I guess the message here is just be open to random things that don't necessarily seem like a good idea at the time. I've also done plenty of these kinds of things where nothing's happened, right? So, you know, confirmation bias in terms of the one that actually did pay off. But anyway.
Amazing. So take us forward to the future. What do you think the future of Citizen Wolf looks like?
So we're at a really interesting moment in time for the business. I mean, we're in a difficult moment in time just in terms of the macroeconomic context, right? Cost of living crisis. If you've got a mortgage, you're in real trouble. If you're renting, you're in real trouble. If you live in Sydney, you're just in real trouble. And we're discretionary at the best of times, right? We don't need more clothes. And because we're made in Sydney and because we do everything right by the planet, we're also not cheap and we don't compete on price. Now, some people are okay with like buying better by buying less, but that tends to be, we find, correlated with age to a degree. All to say, yeah, it's hard to find new customers, right? But, sorry, what was the question?
What does the future of Citizen Wolf look like?
Yeah, so cost of living. So, it's hard right now. It's really hard, super hard in retail. Like we were down, and I don't mind saying this, because you know we went through Birchall, we had to put all of our financials out into the public anyway. So, August we were down 10% year on year, September 20% down, October 30% down year on year. Like 30% is like, this shit's on fire. What are we going to do, right? And we've changed a lot of things, but that brings me to the future. I guess the moment in time for the business is really interesting because the consumer business is what it is. It's doing what it's doing. We've sort of found our groove. We know how to acquire customers and the rest of it. But it's very difficult to grow that business. Short story. So what we're doing actually is figuring out how and where we can apply the technology that we've built to other portions, I suppose, of the apparel or garment manufacturing supply chain. What that means in like English is that we're going into uniforms, right? Where, you know, people are, at this point in time, people are hurting, but businesses have never been more profitable. Like Combank yesterday did $2.5 billion in profit for the quarter or something, right? So like big businesses in particular, big businesses are doing very well, people are hurting. It makes sense for us to go where the money is, in a sense. And so it just turns out that the tech we've built on the consumer side is perfectly suited in many ways for uniforms, and specifically for really big uniform contracts, government or CBA, for example. Anybody of that kind of scale, the uniform contracts mandate a certain amount of custom-made, made-to-measure. 100% of people need a uniform, right? But not 100% of people are going to fit the standard size breaks. So they are mandated to do custom-made, but it's a total disaster. We've heard, one of our new advisors is from that world, and he basically said made to measure is 2% of the supply in a uniform contract, but it takes 50% of the time. In fact, it takes the same amount of time to supply 2% as it does to supply the 98%. So if you guys can go in with a technology solution that basically reduces their time, that could be a real business. And so this is the moment that we find ourselves in, where we're basically figuring out how do we spin the technology out of what we've built and deliver it as a digital product or a digital plus manufacturing component, because we can do it all, into the big uniform or into the uniform market. So.
Great. I think that's a great lesson that you can, no matter what's happening in the business, there's always other avenues you can explore and slightly pivot towards if you just see what else is like the needs within other businesses and other industries.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's not easy. We have built, you know, a direct-to-consumer model in terms of our muscle memory is in acquiring people online on digital ads, right? And that's really different to running a B2B sales funnel. which takes a lot of time. And so anyway, we're in many ways, we're back into startup mode, you know. And not everybody, some people are just staying on the consumer business, but some of us are moving into this new sort of avenue, and it's really exciting.
Great.
It's really exciting.
And for anybody who's watching this, what would help you? What would help enable that future for you?
Yeah, so I guess if you know anybody that needs uniforms in any capacity, please let me know. We obviously make uniforms for people, and then we're trying to spin up this tech-only product for like the existing uniform suppliers, and they're quite different things. So anybody that you know that might need a uniform, business, government, let me know. That would be a big help, because we can help them and everybody can do right by the planet at the same time, and we can save them money too.
Yeah, it's a great win-win. Before we wrap up, I just want to know, how has the entrepreneurial pursuit changed you?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a couple of things, you know. As I said, I quit my job in 2009, and I've been poor ever since, frankly. So I'm pretty good at being poor, and I think that's actually really important.
Great.
If you want to get into any kind of entrepreneurship game in a place like Sydney, because Sydney's like crazy expensive. So being able to live on not a lot and being motivated to do so, right? That's the important bit, because it's not easy. So you really have to believe in what you're doing in order to do that. So firstly. Secondly is like resilience. You know, it's probably pretty obvious, I think, but like the nature of doing something that is perhaps hasn't been done before, or maybe not in exactly that, you know, that version of what you're doing or how you're doing it. There's like two things that define that state. One is inherent uncertainty and constant uncertainty, I should say. And the flip side of that is resilience, and being able to deal with that inherent constant uncertainty and not like losing your mind somewhere in the middle. I'm not sure you can be taught it. I'm not an educator, I couldn't say. But I think you need to learn it, because that's basically, at least in my experience, that's the defining factor. So yeah, being able to live with uncertainty, being resilient financially as well as just like in general to the ups and downs of building a business, because it is not smooth sailing and it is not just up and to the right. You know, it's spinning your wheels and running into walls and you know, being constantly challenged and pushed back on, and being told no all the time, you know, like that's just par for the course. But being able to see through that and believe that you're onto something is critical. I will say one final thing though, and this is something that I don't think I've done a good job of, and that is, or rather, I've willfully ignored the data on many occasions. I should have given up the software business before I did. I should have given up the fashion brand I was in before Citizen Wolf, before I did. I was so pig-headed, I just didn't want to go back to advertising for the most part. But I also just was like, I can do this, but in the end I couldn't. And I just lost a lot of time and money because I just wasn't honest with myself. And so that would be the final thing I would say, you know, is like the flip side of the resilience and all the rest of it is actually being able to step back and say, you know what, this is not working, like find something else. So I wish I'd done that. I didn't, but here I am.
Yeah, and despite all of those things, you know, all of the ventures that you did try, that's really given you the experience to be able to, you know, work on Citizen Wolf. So we take all of these lessons, but they are the things that help prepare you with the resilience and the experience to, move on to your next venture. So Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you so much for chatting to us, Zoltan. So right now, what we'll be doing is turning off the live stream cameras and then going into a Q&A session with everybody who is in the room here today. And this is just a great reminder for anybody who is watching online to come by to UTS Startups every Friday. So you can ask Zoltan and any of our entrepreneurs all the juicy questions about their entrepreneurial experience. But until then, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. Loved chatting with you, and thank you so much. Everybody give it up for Zoltan.
Thank you.